On our 10th anniversary, my husband handed me divorce papers and said, "I got what I needed from you." He hid our assets under his sister's name while I raised our kids. So I hired a forensic accountant and sent him one email that ended it all. Our 10th anniversary dinner was supposed to be a quiet night at home. Just me, my husband Mark, and the kids already asleep upstairs. I had made his favorite meal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and that caramel cake his mom used to bake. He walked in late, wearing that same blue shirt I bought him years ago, the one I used to think made his eyes look kind. He didn't even take off his jacket. He sat down, put a white envelope on the table, and said, "I think you should open that before we eat." I thought maybe it was tickets somewhere, maybe he'd actually planned something romantic for once. But when I opened it, I saw the word petition. Divorce. Filed 3 days ago. At first, I laughed because I thought it had to be a joke. We'd had fights, sure, but nothing that screamed divorce on our anniversary. I said, "Mark, what is this?" He looked at me like he was explaining something to a child. "I got what I needed from you," he said, calm as if he were talking about a loan finally paid off. "You'll survive. You always do." I remember just sitting there, my hands shaking, staring at his face. He didn't flinch, he didn't even blink. Then he stood up, placed his keys on the counter, and walked out. That night I didn't cry. I just sat there in the dark until morning. By the time I called my lawyer, the house felt like a museum, everything still in place, but every memory suddenly false. A week later, my lawyer told me something that made me sick. Mark had been transferring our assets, accounts, property shares, even my grandmother's inheritance, into his sister's name over the past 2 years. All while I was at home raising our kids, believing we were building a life together. "He played you like a business deal," my lawyer said flatly. "This wasn't impulsive, he's been planning it." That was the moment something inside me flipped. I wasn't going to beg or fall apart. I wanted to know how deep this went. So I hired a forensic accountant. Quietly, methodically. And when the truth came out, it made everything worse and far, far darker than I could have imagined. The last thing I emailed him before court wasn't a plea. It was one sentence, attached to a file he never thought I could access. I wrote, "See you in court, partner." Because if he wanted to treat our marriage like a business, I was about to show him what a hostile takeover really looked like. Mark and I met in our late 20s in Chicago. I was working as a paralegal then, saving up for law school, and he was in finance, charming, confident, with the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He had that steady calm that made chaos feel manageable. Back then, I thought he was my anchor. We got married 3 years later in a small ceremony by Lake Michigan. He promised me forever, said we'd build an empire together. I used to think that was just a romantic metaphor. Turns out it wasn't. After our first child, Emma, was born, we agreed I'd stay home just for a few years. He said my job was to focus on the family, and he'd handle the rest. He made it sound like a team effort, like he was protecting me. I believed him, and that was my first mistake. As the years passed, I noticed little things. He started taking more business trips that didn't quite add up. His sister, Carla, was suddenly involved in all his projects. Every time I asked questions about money, he brushed me off. "It's complicated, babe. Don't worry, you wouldn't want to deal with this stress." I stopped pushing because I trusted him. Because when you're juggling kids and a home, it's easier to assume your partner isn't lying. But the cracks were there. One Christmas, I found a statement in his briefcase, an account I didn't recognize. When I asked about it, he got angry. Really angry. He said, "You're becoming paranoid. I handle our finances so you can live without worrying about this crap." And like an idiot, I apologized. 2 years before the divorce papers, he convinced me to sign a few routine documents. He said they were just refinancing paperwork for the house. I signed them without reading closely because it was bedtime, the baby was crying, and he made it sound urgent. Later, I found out that one of those signatures effectively removed my name from a joint property. He'd told the notary I wasn't feeling well and handled it with some kind of proxy clause. My lawyer said it was borderline fraud, but hard to prove without intent. Meanwhile, Carla, his sister, was living in a house that we had bought. I thought it was just family helping family. I even helped her move in. Now I realize I was helping her move my future out of my hands. Mark wasn't just planning a divorce. He was dismantling my life one signature at a time. But he underestimated one thing. I might have been out of the workforce, but I still knew how to build a case. When I hired that forensic accountant, I told him, "Don't look for missing money, look for patterns." What he found made my stomach turn, and it started with a single recurring payment to a name I didn't recognize. A name that would lead straight to the first real betrayal. The forensic accountant, a quiet man named David, came to my house one afternoon with a thin folder and the kind of expression people get when they're about to ruin your entire worldview. He said, "You might want to sit down for this." Inside the folder were bank transfers, emails, and property deeds, all showing a slow, calculated movement of our assets. Every month for almost 2 years, small amounts had been wired into an account under a shell company name, M&C Holdings LLC. M&C, I said, staring at the paper. Mark and Carla, David nodded. Looks like they co-own it. It's registered under her address, but his signature's on the incorporation documents. I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. I had helped that woman decorate her living room. I had babysat her kids. And the whole time, they were running a side operation using my name, my trust, and my silence. The money trail went further than I expected. It linked to a second property, a lake house I didn't even know we owned. It had been purchased by the LLC 6 months earlier for just under $500,000 in cash, all from our accounts. "Your husband's pretty smart," David said. "He set up a structure that makes it look like you benefited from this. On paper, it's all family-owned shared equity. He probably thought you'd never trace it back." I remember staring at the numbers and thinking, this wasn't about money. This was control. Every dollar, every document, was part of a story he was rewriting without me. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine and scrolled through every old email, text, and message between Mark and Carla. I wanted proof, not just paper trails, but emotion, intent. At 2:13 a.m. I found it. An email dated 8 months before he filed for divorce. The subject line read, "Final step." It was from Mark to Carla. The message was short. "Once she signs off on the trust transfer, we're done here. Make sure she doesn't ask questions. You're better at handling her." Better at handling me. Like I was a problem to manage, not a wife, not a person. I sat there in the glow of the laptop screen, shaking, realizing that every smile, every kiss, every "we're in this together" had been strategy. The next morning, I told David to keep digging. I wanted every account, every transaction, every secret laid bare. Because the more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't just about him and his sister. There was someone else in the picture. Someone who had been quietly helping them from the inside. And that discovery, that hidden third player, changed everything. The third player turned out to be someone I never would have suspected, our family lawyer, Tom Rivers. Tom had been our go-to for years. He drafted our wills, handled our taxes, even sent us Christmas cards with handwritten notes. He was one of those nice guys who'd known Mark since college, and I always thought of him as an older brother figure, dependable, dry-humored, the kind of man who wore the same tweed jacket to every meeting. When David showed me the connections, I felt my skin crawl. Apparently, Tom had been quietly rewording contracts for Mark, hiding clauses in routine updates and tax adjustments. The refinance papers I'd signed 2 years ago. Tom had prepared them. The property transfer documents, he'd notarized them. And the kicker, he'd been getting a cut, a 5% consulting fee, wired directly to his firm from M&C Holdings. I called him that same night. I didn't even pretend to be calm. "How long have you been helping him rob me, Tom?" I asked. There was silence for a few seconds, then he sighed. "You don't understand what you're accusing me of." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You used my trust as cover. You were the witness, the middleman, the safety net." His voice went cold. "Look, you've been out of the financial side for years. You don't know what was agreed to. Mark made sure everything was legitimate." I almost laughed. "Legitimate? You mean legal theft? You think hiding behind paperwork makes it clean?" He didn't answer. He just said, "You should focus on moving forward, not revenge. You've got kids to think about." That line, "You've got kids to think about." That's when I realized he was scared. Because if I started talking, if I showed what he'd done, his career was over. The next day, I went to my lawyer. Not Tom, obviously, but a woman named Renee who didn't mince words. She looked through everything, her eyes narrowing as she flipped pages. "This is deeper than divorce," she said. "This is conspiracy, fraud. You could press charges if we prove intent." But intent is tricky. And Mark had made sure everything looked cooperative: joint decisions, mutual signatures, family trusts. Still, Renee told me to keep quiet and gather evidence. "Let them think you're just the wounded wife," she said. "That's when they stop being careful." So that's what I did. I played my role. I texted Mark polite things about the kids, pretended to be confused about the legal stuff, even apologized for making things difficult. Meanwhile, I was building a timeline: emails, transfers, messages. And buried in all of it was something new. A transfer of $75,000 made from M&C Holdings to a woman's account with a memo line that said consulting. Her name wasn't Carla. It wasn't Tom's assistant either. It was a name I'd seen before, years ago, when Mark and I were still happy, back when I trusted him enough to scroll through his phone without suspicion. A name that used to be in his contacts under work. Her name was Alina Brooks, his old girlfriend from before me. And apparently she'd never really gone away. When I saw Alina's name, something in me just went silent. No yelling, no crying, just this cold, surgical kind of focus. I knew then that Mark's betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal, calculated, almost designed to leave me powerless. But he underestimated how calm I get when I'm cornered. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not Renee, not David. I just started observing. Every text he sent, every payment notification, every call from work, I logged it all. Meanwhile, I played nice. When he came to pick up the kids, I smiled. I offered coffee. I asked how he was holding up. It made him comfortable, smug even. He thought I was breaking down. That was exactly what I wanted. I started by having David run Alina's name. She wasn't just some old flame. She was listed as a strategic consultant for M&C Holdings. On paper, she handled vendor coordination. In reality, she was receiving quiet, steady deposits from multiple shell accounts Mark controlled. When I dug deeper, I found something almost poetic. One of those accounts was in my name. He had literally used my social security number to open an account to pay his mistress. That's when my pity died, so I started planning. Not revenge yet, strategy. First, I quietly switched attorneys. I kept Renee as a consultant, but hired a divorce lawyer who specialized in forensic litigation. His name was Eric, and he had a reputation for shredding people like Mark in court. Second, I met with a friend from my old law firm, someone who still worked in compliance. Over drinks, I explained a hypothetical situation involving fraudulent asset transfers, notary abuse, and marital coercion. He said one word that changed my entire approach. RICO. Racketeering. Conspiracy. If I could prove coordinated deception between Mark, Carla, and Tom, especially for personal financial gain, it wasn't just divorce court anymore. It was criminal, so I built my case backwards. I gathered every email, recorded every call where Mark hinted I shouldn't make things messy. I saved every text where he guilted me for hurting the kids when I asked for transparency. I even installed a monitoring system on my own accounts, so every transaction pinged me instantly. The night before our first court date, I stayed up writing an email. Just one sentence, attached to a document I had David prepare, a spreadsheet showing every transaction between Mark, Carla, Tom, and Alina. I scheduled it to send to him and his lawyer at 8 a.m. the next morning. Subject line: Business Partnership Review. Then I printed a copy of our marriage certificate, slipped it into a folder, and put it in my bag. Because that was the one thing none of them could erase or forge, the document that legally tied him to me during every single transfer. When I walked into court that morning, Mark looked relaxed, even a little bored, like a man about to win. He didn't know yet that the email had already hit his inbox. He didn't know that by lunchtime, everything he'd built, every lie, every asset was about to collapse under his own arrogance. And he definitely didn't know who had helped me make that happen. I expected Mark to panic when the email hit. Maybe sweat a little, maybe call his lawyer over. But instead, he just stared at me during that first hearing with this faint smirk, like he still had a card to play. And he did. Halfway through the proceedings, his attorney stood and calmly handed the judge a folder. "Your Honor," he said, "we have reason to believe Mrs. Callahan," he used my married name, of course, "has been mismanaging marital assets without my client's consent. For a second, I couldn't even process the words. The judge, opened the folder. Inside were fake emails, bank transfers, even a falsified signature, my signature, authorizing the same transfers I'd accused Mark of making. It was a counterattack. He'd flipped the narrative. Now I wasn't the victim, I was the supposed thief. My stomach dropped. Renee leaned over and whispered, "Don't react. Don't give him the satisfaction." But Mark leaned forward, voice calm and almost tender. "See, this is what I meant," he said loudly enough for the room to hear. "She's not well, Your Honor. She's been under a lot of stress." He was painting me as unhinged. For a moment, it worked. The judge agreed to delay the financial review until the documents could be verified. Mark looked like he'd just scored the winning goal. But what he didn't know, what made my pulse steady again, was that David had already anticipated this. 2 nights earlier, he'd shown me something shocking. A trail of forged digital documents created on a single laptop, registered under a user account that had accessed our joint cloud backups. The same backups Mark thought I'd deleted years ago. The user, Carla. That was the moment I realized something. Mark wasn't the only one orchestrating this. Carla wasn't just helping, she was the architect. And when I confronted David about why he hadn't told me sooner, he sighed and said, "Because Carla didn't just create those files. She accessed something else too, your personal email." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean accessed?" He hesitated. "She wasn't working with Mark at first. She was watching him, and you. And Alina." Apparently, Carla had been intercepting messages and payments between Mark and Alina for months before the divorce. She was saving evidence, building her own file. When I asked why, David showed me one last thing. A draft email from Carla to Alina, never sent, sitting in the recovered backup. It read, "When this is over, he'll lose everything. You'll get your share and I'll finally be free of both of them." Both of them. That's when I realized she wasn't helping Mark. She was setting him up. And without knowing it, I'd just become part of her plan. The day I learned the why behind it all, I stopped sleeping. Carla's plan wasn't just revenge against her brother. It was years of resentment wrapped in quiet calculation. My forensic accountant, David, managed to pull deleted files from her hard drive, personal letters, drafts, even a few unsent emails to Mark. Reading them felt like staring into someone's rotted soul. The first one started with, "You stole our father's company, just like you stole everything else." I didn't know their father's history until then. Mark always said he built himself from the ground up. But the truth? Their dad owned a small manufacturing firm in Joliet. When he died, the company was supposed to go to both siblings. Instead, Mark had used legal loopholes to buy Carla out for pennies, using Tom, the same lawyer, to draw up the deal. She'd been broke ever since. She played loyal sister on the outside, but quietly she was nursing a grudge so deep it became strategy. When Mark started funneling assets into her name to hide them from me, she saw her opening. She let him. She played dumb. She let him transfer millions through her hands, and then she started rerouting pieces of it into her own accounts under fake LLCs. So while he thought he was screwing me over, she was screwing him. And the kicker? Alina, the mistress, had no clue. She thought she was part of Mark's master plan. But the money she was getting, it wasn't even from him. It was from Carla's side channels. Mark had been dancing in a web his sister spun years before he even realized there was one. But the part that really got me, the part that chilled me, was a note she wrote to herself, tucked in one of her financial logs. It said, "He thinks I'll protect him because he's family, but I protect no one who makes me small." Carla wasn't just stealing from him. She was building her own empire, using both of us as her cover. The reason she helped him hide assets was simple. It kept the IRS and me off her scent. By the time I filed for divorce, she had already siphoned over $600,000 from both of us combined. David looked at me and said, "She's the smartest one in the room, and the coldest." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, rereading her letters. For a moment, I almost admired her precision, the patience it took to play both sides for so long. But then I realized something worse. She didn't just want revenge. She wanted destruction. She wanted both Mark and me ruined so she could walk away as the survivor, the only one left standing. And when I finally confronted Mark in mediation, I watched the realization hit him in real time. The moment he figured out his business partner had been stealing from him too. He looked pale, like the air had been sucked out of the room. But I wasn't done yet. Because while they were busy stabbing each other in the back, I'd been quietly putting together my own endgame. And when I made my move, I made sure both of them fell. When I finally moved, it wasn't loud. Revenge doesn't need fireworks if your paperwork is a bomb. I sat across from my lawyer, Eric, and we walked through everything like surgeons, incision points, arteries to clamp. We had David's spreadsheets, Tom's consulting wires, Carla's draft emails, Alina's deposit records, and the forged documents Mark had tried to pin on me. We had the marriage certificate. We had witnesses. We had motive. We filed a criminal referral with the county prosecutor for fraud and conspiracy. We handed copies to the state attorney general and the IRS. I also sent the spreadsheet to the top partner at Tom's firm, the same man who'd once sent me holiday cards, with a short cover note. You should know what your employee's been doing with clients. The legal system didn't move as fast as a heartbreak, but it moved with a precision I'd honed when I was a paralegal. Within weeks, subpoenas started hitting inboxes. Banks froze accounts tied to M and C Holdings. The lake house had its title clouded. An emergency Lee's pendants showed up on property records. Tom's firm put him on administrative leave pending an ethics investigation. Carla got served, Alina got cut off and enraged. Mark called me, voice cracking, pleading for what I don't know. For mercy, for a deal, for the fantasy he'd lived in that I'd just be small and disappear. I testified in a hearing about the forged documents and watched his face when the expert called out the metadata trail, files created on Carla's laptop, accessed from his home IP in a pattern that matched his business trips. He went white. The judge ordered temporary restraining measures. Custody stayed with me, and Mark was barred from accessing joint accounts. The prosecutor's office eventually indicted all three, Tom for fraud and aiding in forgery, Carla for conspiracy and embezzlement, Alina for being an unwitting co-conspirator who, after evidence, accepted a plea that required her to return what she could. People love tidy endings, but reality is messier. Tom's career was over. He lost his license and paid restitution. Carla fought, then took a plea and faced prison time. The coldest thing I felt there wasn't triumph, it was rusted pity. Mark's professional contacts evaporated. His firm placed him on unpaid leave and eventually terminated him. Divorce court awarded me a settlement that finally put my name back where it belonged. On deeds, on accounts. The lake house was sold. The proceeds were used to cover restitution and lawyer fees. I didn't end up rich, but I ended up intact. What I got wasn't vengeance in the cinematic sense. It was process. Subpoenas, affidavits, expert testimony, the slow mechanical unspooling of their lies. I kept my kids, my house, and my dignity. I rebuilt my life with a job I returned to part-time, then full, legal consulting for women who'd been forced out of careers. I learned to sleep again. The last thing I emailed Mark before the judge signed the final decree was clinical, almost boring. A PDF of the settlement and one line, not a threat, not a plea, just a fact. Case closed. Take care of yourself. He read it, and something in his face crumpled that night. I saw him broad daylight at the bakery. The man who'd once been my anchor reduced to visiting the place I'd brought our kids for cinnamon rolls. He looked at me like a stranger. I felt nothing electric or triumphant, only a deep, steady relief, like the sound a latch makes when it finally clicks. Then I walked out with Emma and our son, and we bought too many pastries. Life after betrayal is ordinary and stubbornly sweet. And yes, I survived like I always do. But this time I walked away with the receipts.